The first thing you heard wasn't a voice. It was the sound of a silver dollar hitting wood. A sharp, lonely clang in the dead air of Furnace Hollow. Dust didn't even move. It just hung there, thick and yellow, coating the silence. The sun was a hammer, beating down on the timbered roofs, on the sweat-slicked faces of the crowd, on the rough-hewn platform in the center of the square. And on the platform, a woman knelt. You couldn't see her face. A coarse burlap sack covered her head, stained with sweat and God knows what else. Her wrists were bound tight with old leather, and her belly, even beneath the shapeless dress, curved outward. A life she hadn't asked for. A life she was about to pay for. Sheriff Amos Boone stood beside her. He was a man built from a barrel and filled with vinegar. His mustache, stained with tobacco, twitched like a trapped animal. He spat a brown stream into the dust, his eyes sweeping over the silent faces. One woman, his voice scraped the air. No kin, no dowry, no husband. He kicked the platform lightly. A puff of dust rose. Trouble for any man dumb enough to take her, he smirked. Reckon we start the bidding at $1 silver. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Men shuffled their feet. Women pulled their children closer, their whispers like rustling snakes. Sin, ruin. The preacher's daughter, straying from the path. Boone let the silence stretch. He enjoyed it. She don't fetch that, he announced, his voice booming now. I'll turn her over to the county workhouse. She can drop that bastard child there. They'll know what to do with it. The figure on the platform trembled, just once. A tiny, violent shudder that ran through her whole body. From the edge of the square, a shadow detached itself from the wall of the saloon. He was different, taller than the rest, broader. His skin was the color of rich earth baked in the sun. He was bare-chested, muscles coiled like sleeping pythons under skin crisscrossed with old stories. An ugly, pale scar, shaped like a broken moon, curved across his collarbone. 2 long, black braids fell past his ribs. His name was Dakota Red Elk. But the white folks, when they dared speak of him at all, called him Cody. He lived out in the canyons, where even the wolves tread carefully. He was a ghost, a whisper, a man who belonged to the rocks and the wind, not to a town like Furnace Hollow. The crowd saw him coming and parted like water before a stone. No one made a sound. He walked without apology, his dusty boots making no noise on the hard-packed ground. "Ain't he Apache?" a boy whispered, before his father's hand cracked across the back of his head. Cody stopped at the foot of the platform. Sheriff Boone's face split into a slow, cruel grin. Well, if it ain't the Red Ghost himself, come down from your mountain to do some shopping, savage." Cody didn't answer him. His eyes, dark and deep as a well, were fixed on the kneeling woman. She trembled again. The sack over her head shifted, and then a voice, thin and cracked, slipped through the burlap. It was barely a whisper, but in the dead silence, it carried like a scream. "My baby is coming." A beat of absolute stillness. The world held its breath. Then she spoke again, and this time there was something else in her voice. Not hope. Hope had died a long time ago. This was something harder, something forged in the ashes of hope. "Please, remove the sack, and buy me." Sheriff Boone let out a bark of laughter. "The little sinner has a request. You hear that, boys?" But Cody was already moving. He stepped onto the platform, his weight making the new wood groan. Boone's smile vanished, replaced by a scowl. "Now hold on just a damn minute." Cody ignored him. He knelt in front of the woman. His hands, large and calloused, moved with a surprising gentleness. He didn't rush. He untied the leather strips at her wrists, his fingers working the stiff knots with a steady patience. Then he reached up. The entire town watched, silent and unblinking. He lifted the sack. The woman who knelt there was Rosa Lynn Whitaker, the preacher's daughter. She blinked against the sudden, brutal light, her eyes dazed. They were a strange, gold-flecked hazel, lost in a face pale and gaunt. One of her lips was split and healing. Dark curls, damp with sweat, clung to her neck. She took a shallow, ragged breath, her body tight with the heat and the weight of her unborn child. She looked at the man kneeling before her, and in his eyes, dark earth, burning fire, she saw something that made her own tormented soul go still. It wasn't pity, it wasn't lust, it was recognition. Cody reached into the leather satchel at his hip. He pulled out a single, heavy silver coin. It gleamed in the harsh sunlight. He didn't toss it. He placed it carefully on the wooden platform right beside her knee. The sound echoed the first one. A final, definitive clang. "Sold," Sheriff Boone spat, as if the word tasted foul in his mouth. He shot a wad of tobacco juice into the dirt. "God have mercy on your poor fool soul." Cody paid him no mind. He stood, and with the fluid ease of a man used to lifting heavy burdens in worse weather, he scooped Rosa up into his arms. She flinched, expecting roughness, expecting a master's touch. But he held her as if she were made of glass, not as something broken, but as something precious he was determined to carry. Her arms, limp with exhaustion, draped around his neck. The crowd watched them go, a wall of silent, staring faces. As Cody walked away, his back straight and unyielding, dust rose from his steps, trailing them like a phantom. No one dared to speak. No one dared to move until they were gone. Sheriff Boone kicked the platform hard. "Let that Apache take her," he snarled to the men nearest him. "The baby'll come. It'll die. So will she. That's what you get for mixing sin with savagery." But behind the post office, half hidden in the shadows, a woman named Minnie Braith folded her weathered arms across her chest. "Or maybe," she whispered to the wind, "that's what you get for mocking God's mercy." And she wasn't sure who she was talking about, the girl or the man who bought her. The trail Cody took was not a trail for men. It was a goat path, a memory of water, a line drawn through a landscape that hated straight lines. It wound past the edge of what Furnace Hollow called proper land, and into a world of green-armed cacti and watchful coyotes. The land climbed, jagged and unforgiving, toward cliffs that bled red in the afternoon sun. At the top, nestled under the gaze of a single crooked cottonwood tree, was a cabin. It looked like it had grown out of the earth itself, built of old hands and older grief. By the time they reached the threshold, Rosa had been drifting in a haze of pain and heat. The baby shifted inside her, a relentless tide pulling her under. Cody hadn't said a single word the entire journey. He didn't need to. His silence was a shield. He set her down gently on a pallet of soft furs near the cold hearth. He brought her water in a clay cup, his movements economical and sure. Then he was gone, back outside into the punishing heat. The cabin smelled of wood smoke, leather, and dried sage. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light slanting through the window. Rosa sipped the water. It was cool and clean. Her eyes scanned the small space. A single room, impeccably neat. A shelf with a few worn books. A carving knife lay next to a half-whittled figure of a horse. A single perfect hawk feather hung from a nail above the window. She tried to stand. Her legs buckled. A sharp, hot pain shot through her back and she gasped, her palm flying to her belly. A contraction, faint, but undeniable. It scared her more than the auction, more than the sack, more than the hate in Boone's eyes. She bit her lip until the metallic taste of blood filled her mouth. Outside, the steady rhythm of an axe began. Thwack, thwack, thwack. Cody was chopping wood. Each swing was powerful, measured, not angry, not rushed. It was a rhythm like a heartbeat, the heartbeat of the mountain. She watched him from the open doorway. He hadn't looked at her the way other men did, not with heat, not with hunger. He hadn't looked at her with pity either, which was somehow worse. He had looked at her with a quiet understanding that shook her to her very core. How could this man, this stranger, this savage, look at her and see her? That night, he didn't come inside. He slept on the ground near his horses. She could hear them huffing in the dark, the soft creak of saddle leather. She curled on the pallet, wrapped in a blanket that smelled of him and dreamed of fire and water. When she woke, the sun was a low golden smear across the canyon gap, and on the windowsill there was a peach. It was perfect, soft, ripe, blushing with color, a silent offering, a quiet declaration that someone, somewhere, thought she might still deserve a little sweetness. Her throat tightened. A sob threatened to break free, but she choked it down. She ate the peach slowly, skin and all, the juice dripping down her chin. It was the best thing she had ever tasted. She looked out the door. He was already working, mending a fence post, his back to her. His torso was bare again, the sun glinting off the landscape of his scars. They weren't just on his chest. A latticework of old, healed wounds covered his back, speaking of battles no one in Furnace Hollow could even imagine. "You didn't have to carry me," she whispered to the empty air. But he had. And somehow, in the broken, silent world she now inhabited, that single act of carrying her mattered more than anything anyone had ever said. But Rosa was about to learn that being carried was only the beginning. The price of that silver dollar wasn't just her freedom. It was a debt. And the man who paid it had secrets of his own, buried deeper than any canyon grave. The next few days passed in a strange, silent rhythm. Rosa woke each morning to a piece of fruit on the windowsill, a peach, a pear, once a handful of wild berries. She would eat, and then watch as Cody moved about his world. He mended fences, tended his 2 horses, sharpened tools, and disappeared for hours into the canyons, always returning with herbs or roots she didn't recognize. He never spoke. She never asked. The silence was a language all its own. On the 3rd day, she felt a flicker of strength return. The baby had settled, a heavy, quiet weight inside her. She decided she couldn't be a useless burden any longer. She found a worn straw broom in the corner and tried to sweep the cabin's rough-hewn floor. Her back screamed in protest after only a few strokes. A wave of dizziness washed over her, and she dropped to her knees, gasping, her teeth clenched against the pain. The cabin door opened. Cody stood there, silhouetted against the bright morning. He didn't speak. He didn't rush to help her. He simply walked past her, took the broom from where it had fallen, and began to sweep. His strokes were long and even, measured, quiet. He wasn't just cleaning a floor. He was tending to the space, bringing order to it. She sat back against the wall, her breath coming in shallow pants, and watched him. She noticed things she hadn't before. The way his braids were always perfectly tight, woven with a precision that spoke of discipline. The way the scars on his hands weren't from fights, but from something else. They were uniform, old, and deep. The kind of scars left by rope or shackles. "What happened to your leg?" she asked, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. He favored his right leg with a slight, almost imperceptible limp. He didn't stop sweeping. He didn't even turn his head. But for a moment, the rhythm of the broom faltered. A shadow passed through his eyes, a darkness that had nothing to do with the light. "Horse fell," he said softly. "Years ago." It was a lie. She knew it instantly. It was a wall he put up, a door he closed. Pain that old and that deep didn't want company. She didn't ask again. Later that day, he brought in bundles of yarrow and sage, laying them near the hearth to dry. The scent filled the small cabin, clean and sharp. She tried to help him sort them, but her fingers were clumsy, and a sudden, sharp kick from the baby made her wince and sit down hard on the pallet. Cody stopped what he was doing. He crouched beside her, and for the first time, he touched her. He placed a hand gently on her knee. It wasn't a comforting gesture, not really. It was a steadying one. His hand was warm and heavy, a solid point in her spinning world. His eyes didn't look at her face. They looked at her stomach, at the place where the baby had kicked. He nodded once, a quick, sharp movement of his head. Then he rose and went outside. He returned a moment later with another peach. A strange, watery laugh escaped her lips. "You got a whole tree of these?" He nodded once. That was all. No smile, not even a twitch of his lips. She bit into the fruit, the juice a welcome sweetness. It tasted like sunshine. That evening, the fragile peace was shattered. A rider appeared on the ridge, a dark silhouette against the blood-red sunset. Cody saw him first. He was standing outside, and he went perfectly still, like a statue carved from the canyon rock. The rider was Deputy Lester Crane, wiry, nervous, with a badge that looked too big for his chest. He rode stiffly, like a man who hated his saddle. "Boone sent me," he said, his voice rough but not unkind. He wouldn't look directly at Cody. His eyes kept darting to the cabin door where Rosa now stood, her hand resting on the frame. "Wants the girl back," Lester continued, swallowing hard. "Says the silver dollar was just a deposit. Says she's town property now, not yours to keep." Cody said nothing. His silence was more intimidating than any threat. "She's with child," Lester stammered, as if that explained everything. "The town council, they say she's a moral threat. We got an order from the circuit judge. It says any settler, any white settler, not under a proper work contract, can be remanded to county care." Cody just looked at him. The sun was setting behind him, casting his face in shadow, but his eyes seemed to burn. The deputy's composure crumbled. "Look, I'll tell him you weren't home," he said, already turning his horse. "But he'll be back, Cody. He's not going to let this go." Dust trailed the deputy like a guilty conscience as he rode away. Rosa was still standing in the doorway when Cody turned back to the cabin. His face was unreadable, a mask of stone. "You'll get in trouble," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "If you keep me." He stood before her, arms crossed loosely over his powerful chest. The last light of the sun haloed his form in gold and red. His voice was gravel, deep and resonant. "I didn't buy you to leave you." The words hit her like a physical blow. She blinked, a tear she didn't know was there tracing a clean path through the grime on her cheek. She turned her head, unable to meet his gaze. I never thought I'd matter again. You do now." 3 words, no frills, no softness. But they struck deeper than any sermon she had ever heard. That night, she watched him through the small window. He was outside, by the corral, working by moonlight. He was building something small, out of cedar branches. It wasn't a pen for a horse. He was measuring the wood with his hands, his boot, sketching shapes in the dirt. Rosa's breath caught in her throat. He was building a cradle. She stood there, one hand on her belly, the other pressed against the cool glass of the window, and a question she didn't know she had burned in her mind. "Did you ever want a family?" she asked the next day, her voice small. He was sanding a piece of the cradle, his back to her. He paused, his hands going still. "Had one," he said. The words were flat, empty. She waited. The silence stretched, heavy and painful. He didn't continue, so she offered a piece of her own brokenness. "I lost mine, long before the baby." He turned his head slightly, his profile sharp against the light. His voice was quiet, but it cut through her self-pity like a knife. "You didn't lose it," he said. "They left you." The distinction was brutal and true. It gutted her. That evening, she sat on the porch steps, watching the moon rise. He sat on the edge of the porch, whittling, the shavings falling like snow at his feet. They sat in a comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between people who have seen the worst of the world. "When the time comes," she began, her voice trembling slightly, Will you stay?" He didn't look at her. He just kept carving, but he nodded. "I always stay." The quiet between them softened. The fire inside the cabin flickered, casting a warm glow. The cradle waited in the corner, not yet finished, but started. And for the first time in almost a year, that felt like enough. But a storm was gathering over Furnace Hollow. A storm of rumor and hate, and it was heading straight for their mountain. Because Sheriff Boone had discovered something. A piece of paper. A deed. And he now knew that the land Cody lived on, the cabin, the creek, the single crooked cottonwood tree, It didn't belong to the savage. It belonged to her. The heat of midsummer settled over the canyon like a shroud. The air was white, still, and silent. Even the hawks had stopped circling. It was the kind of stillness that comes before everything breaks. Rosa sat on the porch, her swollen ankles soaking in a tin basin of lukewarm water. The baby was pressing up against her ribs, making every breath a chore. She watched Cody wrestle with the stubborn wheel of his old wagon. He hadn't said much all week, but she'd learned to read the lines of his shoulders. Today, they were tight as coiled rope. He saw it before she did. A flicker of dust on the distant trail. A single rider, moving not with the nervous energy of Deputy Crane, but with a slow, righteous certainty. "Someone's coming," she said, her hand gripping the rim of the basin. Cody straightened. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't need to. He was the weapon. He just stood there, waiting, his body a study in defiant stillness. She knew the rider's voice before she could make out his face. It was a voice that echoed in the darkest corners of her memory, a voice that had once spoken of salvation and now only promised damnation. Reverend Alden Dross. He was the man who had baptized her, the man who had praised her piety, the man who had cast her out into the wilderness without a second thought. "My God," he muttered, dismounting with a pained grunt. His face, usually florid and self-satisfied, was pale with shock. His eyes raked over her, from her bare feet to her swollen belly, as if she were a piece of filth spoiling his view. "I heard the rumors. I told myself they were lies, but here you are, fat with shame, keeping house for a savage." Cody took a half step, placing his body between Rosa and the preacher. He didn't say a word, but the message was clear. "Don't," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. He wasn't looking at her. His eyes were locked on the preacher. Reverend Dross threw his hat on the ground in a gesture of theatrical fury. "I gave you every chance, Rosalind, every warning, and this is what you've become. You were a child of the Lord." Her hands clenched the worn fabric of her dress. "The Lord didn't throw me out," she said, her voice low but clear. "You did." The preacher stiffened, as if struck. "I was carrying your son's child," she added, the words tasting like poison. "He ran. You told me to go. You told the whole town I was a liar and a temptress. You never even said my name again." This was the story everyone knew, the story she had clung to. But it was only half the truth, and the other half was a secret she guarded with her life. The preacher's face turned a mottled shade of red. "You should have drowned the sin before it grew legs," he hissed. A muscle in Cody's jaw twitched. That was the only sign of the rage simmering beneath his calm exterior. "You need to come back to town," Dross commanded, his voice regaining its booming, authoritative tone. "Before that baby is born. Before Boone decides you're raising some half-breed demon in the wild. You need to repent, girl. Wash your hands of this filth." Cody stepped forward, his shadow falling over the preacher like a gathering storm. "You done talking?" The preacher scoffed. "I'll be back, with the law, and when I am, you'll be sorry you ever laid eyes on her." But his words faltered. Cody just stared at him. And in that silent, unblinking gaze, there was a promise of violence so profound, so absolute, that it stripped the courage from the preacher's bones. Reverend Dross snatched his hat from the dust, scrambled onto his horse, and fled. When he was gone, Rosa curled forward, her body racked with dry, choking sobs. Cody brought her a cup of water, his large hand steady. I never thought he'd come all the way out here," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "You're not what he says you are." She looked up at him, tears clinging to her lashes. "You don't know what I am." "I know what you're not," he replied. And in his eyes, she saw not just acceptance, but a fierce, protective loyalty that stole her breath. He knew something. He had to. Why else would he defend her so fiercely? That night, Cody stayed inside. He sat by the hearth, carving small animals out of pine wood while she dozed fitfully. A rabbit, a bear. A horse with one leg shorter than the others. She watched him through half-closed lids, the firelight dancing on his scarred skin. "Why?" she asked, the question hanging in the quiet space between them. "Why do you keep me? It would be so much easier to let me go." He didn't look up from his carving. "You stay because you want to." "I didn't choose this," she whispered. He set the small wooden horse down. His eyes met hers across the flickering flames. "Then choose now." Her gaze drifted to the cradle in the corner, its lines clean and strong. It was almost finished. "I want to stay," she said, and the words were a vow. But the choice might not be hers to make. The next day, a new visitor arrived. Minnie Braith, her face grim, her apron flapping like a surrender flag. She hadn't ridden, she had walked, a testament to her urgency. "A storm's coming," she said, gulping the water Cody offered her. "Not from the sky, from the town." She laid her cards on the table. "Boone's not just talking about moral threats anymore. He's found something, a legal paper. Your father's will, Rosa." Rosa stared at her, uncomprehending. "This land," Minnie said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The cabin, the whole damn canyon. Your father left it to you. You're the legal owner." The air went out of Rosa's lungs. All this time, she had been living on her own land. "Boone's calling it unlawful housing," Minnie continued, her eyes flashing with anger. "He's telling the judge you're an unfit mother, cohabitating with an Indian on your own property without proper sanction. He says the baby can't be born here. He's claiming that as sheriff, he has the right to act as temporary steward of the land, and any assets on it, including the child." Minnie's face was pale. "He's got Lester and 2 other men. They're riding out tonight. He's not coming to warn you, honey. He's coming to take you." Rosa's hand flew to her belly. "No." Cody's hand flexed on the doorframe. His knuckles were white. "I won't let them take her." Minnie nodded. "Didn't think you would. That's why I brought this." She opened her satchel. Linens, herbs, a flask of whiskey, and a thin-bladed knife, sterilized and sharp. "I've delivered more babies than that town has baptized," she said, her voice ringing with defiance. "I'll stay till it's done. Let them come." That night, as the moon rose, Cody saddled his horse. He didn't ride toward town. He rode east, up to a stony overlook where the trail forked. He waited in the shadows of a juniper tree. Around midnight, hooves approached. 2 riders, 1 lantern. It was Deputy Crane and a young, nervous boy. Lester saw Cody's silhouette and reined in his horse. "Don't!" he said sharply, as the boy reached for his gun. "We got orders, Lester," the boy whispered, his voice cracking. A new voice cut through the darkness, deep, calm, and deadly. "And I've got no fear left," Cody said. Lester dismounted. He walked forward, stopping just at the edge of the lantern light. "She's not a criminal, Cody. We both know that." "Then don't act like one." The deputy swallowed hard. "If she stays, Boone will use that deed to ruin you both. He'll take the land, the child, everything." Cody's eyes were like chips of obsidian in the moonlight. "This is her land. We're not leaving." Lester let out a long, slow breath. He looked back at the boy, then at the dark, unyielding figure before him. He made a decision. "I'll say I lost the trail. Once," he said. He turned, mounted his horse, and rode back the way he came, leaving the boy to follow in his confused and fearful wake. When Cody returned to the cabin, Rosa was standing in the doorway, bathed in moonlight. Her cotton dress clung to the perfect round curve of her belly. I thought they'd come for me," she whispered. "They didn't," he said, stepping onto the porch. He stopped in front of her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "You keep doing this," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Doing what?" "Choosing me." He lifted his hand. For a moment it hovered in the space between them. Then, with a gentleness that shattered her, he touched her cheek. His calloused fingers were surprisingly soft against her skin. I never stopped, he whispered. Her breath caught. The world seemed to stop spinning. The wind died. The crickets went silent. And in that dry, breathless, terrifying moment, something inside her heart, something she thought had been buried under a mountain of shame and grief, unfurled. She leaned into his touch, and though no other words passed between them, she knew. She knew why he had bought her. She knew why he had stayed. It wasn't just about his lost family. It wasn't just about her land. It was about her father. And she knew, with a sudden, chilling certainty, that Cody and her father had a history that Sheriff Boone had tried to bury, a history that was about to be unearthed. The baby was coming. It was no longer a question, but a fact, as certain and as unstoppable as the sunrise. The pains had started in the small hours of the morning, dull aches that radiated from the small of her back. By dawn, they were sharper, stealing her breath and making the world narrow to a single point of intense focus. Minnie was a rock, a general. She moved with a purpose that belied her age, barking quiet orders for boiled water, clean linens, and for Cody to stay close. Cody didn't need to be told. He was a silent, steady presence at Rosa's side, his hand a warm, solid anchor on her back, his voice a low murmur in her ear. Breathe. I'm here. Breathe. The cradle he had built sat in the corner, the carving of the hummingbird on its headboard now complete, its wings frozen in mid-flight, a symbol of a future that felt impossibly far away. Just as the sun crested the canyon rim, spilling liquid gold across the parched earth, a new sound cut through the tense quiet of the cabin. Hoofbeats. Not 2 riders this time. 4, maybe 5, moving fast. He's here, Minnie said, her voice grim. She wiped a stray strand of gray hair from her face, her eyes hard as flint. Cody rose. He pulled on his shirt, his movements fluid and unhurried. He didn't reach for his rifle. He slid his long carving knife into the sheath on his belt. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement. He opened the door and stepped out onto the porch, blinking in the sudden, bright light. Sheriff Boone sat on his horse, his face red and swollen with fury. Behind him were 4 men Rosa didn't recognize. Hard-faced men with cold eyes and guns worn with familiarity. Hired guns. Not townsmen who could be swayed by conscience. "I've got the writ!" Boone bellowed, waving a piece of paper in the air. "Signed by the judge himself. The child is to be removed at birth and placed in county custody. The woman is deemed mentally unfit, and you, Savage, are charged with obstruction." "She's in labor," Cody said, his voice dangerously calm. "I don't care if she's giving birth to God himself," Boone roared, swinging himself down from his horse. "That child is an asset of the county to be held in trust with the land. You're not taking her, Boone." Boone drew his revolver, the click of the hammer cocking echoing in the still morning air. "I am. And if you stand in my way, I'll see you hang." Cody didn't flinch. A strange, cold smile touched his lips. "You already tried to kill me once, Amos. It didn't stick." Boone's eyes widened slightly. The mask of the confident lawman slipped, revealing the furious, cornered man beneath. What are you talking about?" "The rock slide," Cody said, his voice dropping lower. "At the old silver claim, the one that killed her father." Rosa heard it from inside the cabin. A gasp escaped her lips, lost in a wave of pain. Her father. They were talking about her father. "You were there, weren't you, Amos?" Cody continued, taking a slow step forward. "You and Preacher Dross. You thought no one saw. You thought you buried your secret with him." Boone's face went white. "You're insane! That was an accident!" "There are no accidents in these canyons," Cody said. "Only men's greed." The hired guns shifted uneasily. This wasn't what they had signed up for. They were here to strong-arm a squatter, not witness a murder accusation. And then, from inside the cabin, a sound that changed everything. A baby's first cry, sharp, piercing, and vibrantly alive. Boone froze, his gun hand wavering. The riders behind him stared at the cabin door, their hard faces suddenly uncertain. The door opened. Minnie Braith stood there, her arms trembling, a tiny, blanket-wrapped bundle held tight against her chest. Her face was exhausted, but her eyes blazed with a triumphant fire. "The child is born," she declared, her voice ringing with an ancient, untouchable authority. "A girl, and by the grace of God she lives." She walked down the 2 porch steps, her small frame radiating a strength that dwarfed every man there. She planted herself directly in front of Sheriff Boone. "You want to take her?" Minnie challenged, her voice shaking with rage. "You'll have to shoot me first, a grandmother, standing in the way of a thief." Boone stared at the baby, then at the old woman, then at the silent, implacable man whose eyes promised a retribution worse than death. The bravado drained out of him, leaving behind a pathetic, sputtering rage. One of the hired guns lowered his rifle. Another slowly turned his horse, backing away. They were killers for hire, not baby snatchers. Boone looked back and saw that he was alone. The power he wielded, the fear he inspired, had evaporated in the morning sun. He spat on the ground. "This ain't over." "You're right," Minnie said, her voice like ice. "It's just beginning." He scrambled back onto his horse and rode away, swallowed by a cloud of his own dust and fury. Inside the cabin, Rosa held her daughter for the first time. Tears of pain, relief, and overwhelming love streamed down her face, mingling with the sweat of her ordeal. The baby was so small, so perfect. Her tiny hand curled around Rosa's finger. Hope. That's what she would call her. Not for the world, for herself. Cody knelt beside the pallet, his massive hand gently resting over both of theirs. His face, usually a mask of stoic control, was softened by an emotion Rosa had never seen there before. "She looks like you," he whispered. Rosa managed a weak smile. "Then maybe she'll be strong." "She already is," he said. But the real secret, the one that had been buried for a year, was still unspoken. The secret of why her father had really been at that silver claim. The secret of who else was there. The secret that would not only destroy Sheriff Boone and Reverend Dross, but would change everything Rosa thought she knew about the man who had just saved her. Because the preacher's son had not been the father of her child. That was a lie she had told to protect the memory of the man she had truly loved. A young surveyor named Thomas, who had discovered what Boone and the preacher were really doing at that silver claim, and who had been silenced for it. Cody had been there. He had seen it all. He hadn't been able to save her father or Thomas. But he had made a promise to a dying man, a promise to find his daughter and keep her safe, no matter the cost. Dawn cracked like a fragile egg over Furnace Hollow, but the light brought no warmth, only a harsh, clarifying glare. The world had been remade in the night. A child had been born. A sheriff had been defied. A secret had been unearthed. And now, the reckoning was coming. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with the scent of birth and wood smoke. Rosa held her daughter Hope, her arms shaking with exhaustion and a fierce, primal love. Every fear, every moment of shame, every ounce of pain had distilled itself into this one perfect, tiny being. Cody sat by the hearth, sharpening his knife. The rhythmic scrape of stone on steel was the only sound. It was a meditative, deadly sound. He was preparing for a war he had been waiting a year to fight. Minnie, bone-tired but resolute, was packing her satchel. "I have to go back," she said, her voice low. "The town needs to know the truth, not just Boone's lies, the whole truth." "It's not safe," Rosa whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Boone is a coward," Minnie cut her off, "and cowards are only strong when good people do nothing." She looked at Cody. "You bought her. You saved her. Now it's our turn." Before she could leave, another rider appeared. Deputy Lester Crane. He didn't ride to the porch. He dismounted at the edge of the clearing, his face pale and grim. "He's not giving up," Lester said, his voice tight. "He's gone to the circuit judge. He's twisting the story. Says you're holding a white woman hostage, that the child was born of coercion. He's painting you as a monster, Cody." He's coming back with a federal marshal. A marshal. The word hung in the air, cold and heavy as a coffin lid. This was no longer about town law. This was bigger, more dangerous. He knows, Rosa said, looking at Cody. He knows you saw what he did to my father. Cody nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Lester's face. He doesn't know I was there for your father. He thinks I was there for the silver. Another layer peeled back, another piece of the puzzle sliding into place. My father. He found you, Rosa asked, her voice trembling. He found me after they took my family, Cody said, the words costing him more than all the silver in the mountains. My wife, my son, they died from the sickness the white miners brought. Your father was the only one who showed us kindness. He gave us medicine, food. He treated us like people. Tears welled in Rosa's eyes. Her father, the gentle, bookish man she remembered, had been more than just a preacher. He had been a good man. When Boone and the Reverend made their move to steal the claim, Cody continued, his voice hardening, your father came to warn me. He knew they were dangerous. He told me to take what was left of my people and flee. He tried to reason with them. Cody's hand clenched around the hilt of his knife. I was too far away. I heard the shouting. I saw the rocks fall. By the time I got there, he was gone. And so was the surveyor, Thomas. Rosa's breath hitched. Thomas, the man she had loved, the true father of her child, the man she had let the world believe was a fiction, a sin she had committed with the preacher's cowardly son. You saw it all, she whispered. I saw it all, he confirmed. And I made a promise to your father's spirit. I would find you. I would protect you. The land was yours. The future was yours. I would be its guardian. This was the truth, the whole devastating, beautiful truth. He hadn't bought a woman. He had fulfilled a sacred vow. He hadn't rescued a sinner. He had protected an heiress. Lester Crane looked from Cody's resolute face to the fierce determination in Rosa's eyes. A federal marshal won't listen to an Apache's word against a sheriff's, he said, his voice laced with despair. He won't have to, a new voice said. Minnie Braith stood in the doorway, a triumphant smile on her face. And she was not alone. Behind her, standing in a silent, determined line, were a dozen people from Furnace Hollow. The blacksmith, his hammer held loosely in one hand. The saloon owner, the woman who ran the general store, farmers and wives, their faces grim, their eyes clear. The town has voted, Lester, Minnie announced. We sent a rider of our own last night, to a different judge. We told him the truth, about Boone, about the preacher, about Rosa. Just then, 2 more riders crested the hill. One was a tall, stern-faced man with a silver star pinned to his vest. The U.S. Marshal. The other was Reverend Alden Dross, his hands bound in front of him, his face a mask of disbelief and terror. The marshal dismounted, his eyes sweeping over the scene. He looked at Cody, at the townspeople, at Rosa holding her baby. Then, his gaze settled on the bound preacher. Amos Boone has been arrested, the marshal said, his voice booming with authority, on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and the murders of John Whitaker and Thomas Miller. This man, he jerked his head toward Dross, has confessed to everything in exchange for a lighter sentence. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Justice, real justice. It was happening. But Boone wasn't a man to be taken easily. A shot rang out from the rocks above the cabin. The marshal grunted, staggering back, a red stain blooming on his shoulder. Amos Boone stood on the ridge, a rifle in his hands, his face contorted in a mask of pure, nihilistic rage. "If I can't have it, no one can!" he screamed, leveling the rifle not at Cody, but at Rosa. Time slowed to a crawl. Cody moved. He was not a man anymore. He was a force of nature, an arrow launched from a bow. He covered the ground between the porch and the open clearing in a blur of motion, but he wouldn't be fast enough. Then another figure moved. Lester Crane, the nervous, reluctant deputy. He drew his pistol, his hand surprisingly steady, and fired. Once. twice. Boone jerked, a look of surprise on his face. He dropped the rifle, clutched at his chest, and toppled backward, disappearing behind the rocks. Silence. Then the baby cried. The spell was broken. The townspeople rushed forward, some to help the wounded marshal, others just staring in shock at the spot where the sheriff had fallen. Cody didn't look at the ridge. He didn't look at the marshal. He walked back to the cabin, back to the porch where Rosa stood clutching her baby, her heart hammering against her ribs. He stopped in front of her. He reached out, not to touch her, but to gently touch the baby's cheek with the back of one calloused finger. He made a promise, Cody said, his voice thick with an emotion he could no longer contain. Your father. I promised him I would see his line continue, that his hope would not die in this canyon. He looked at the baby, then at Rosa, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Hope, he whispered. It was more than a name. It was a prayer. It was a victory. The land was theirs. The future was theirs. They had paid for it in blood and grief, but they had won. Weeks later, the cottonwood tree provided shade for a new life. The cradle rocked gently in the breeze. The cabin, once a place of grief and solitude, was filled with the sounds of a baby's laughter. Cody and Rosa worked the land together. They were two broken people from two different worlds, forged into something new, something whole, by the fires of Furnace Hollow. They didn't have a marriage certificate. They didn't have the town's official blessing. They had something better. They had each other. They had hope. They had built a life on the one piece of ground that no one could ever take from them. A foundation of courage, loyalty, and a love that had been bought for the price of a single silver dollar. And if you ever find yourself in that forgotten canyon, you won't find a monument to their struggle. You'll just find a cabin, a family, and the quiet understanding that sometimes the greatest treasures are the ones we have to fight the hardest to keep. Sometimes, a second chance is all anyone needs. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, and let us know in the comments, what does it truly mean to be family?